My name is Marlene, and I work in what my parents dismissively called fancy consulting. It's a demanding career, one that took years of grinding and sacrifice to build. I've managed multi-million-dollar projects, advised CEOs, and built a reputation for meticulousness and integrity. But the moment I found out what my own family really thought of me, what they were doing behind my back, well, let's just say no boardroom battle could have ever prepared me for that. They thought I'd never uncover the truth about the elaborate web of lies they'd spun, a web that entangled not just me, but the one person I cherished most, my Grandma Palmer. I'm about to share a story that's still incredibly painful to recount, a story about betrayal, so profound it rips your world apart and forces you to rebuild it from the ashes. There are multiple truths that will be revealed, truths I'm still grappling with. Truths that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the people closest to you. I've always been the strong one, the one who handles things, but uncovering this, it brought me to my knees. There were nights I just stared at the ceiling, my heart a hollow drum, wondering how I could have been so blind. This isn't just my story. It's a warning, a plea, and hopefully a beacon of strength for anyone who's ever felt unseen, unheard, or unloved by those who should have cherished them most. If you've ever experienced the sting of betrayal from family, or the gut-wrenching realization that the people you trusted implicitly were capable of unimaginable deceit, comment below and subscribe. You're not alone. Trust me, if you're someone who believes in loyalty, in family, in basic human decency, this story will change how you see family forever. And it might just empower you to look a little closer, to listen a little harder, because sometimes the most devastating monsters are the ones sleeping under your own roof. To understand the depth of the betrayal, you need to understand my family. We weren't a picture-perfect postcard, but from the outside, we probably looked normal. My father, Alan Wilkinson, was a man of grand pronouncements and even grander unfulfilled ambitions. He had a charm that could woo a bird from a tree, but it often masked a deep-seated insecurity and a lazy streak a mile wide. My mother, Linda Wilkinson, was the more pragmatic of the two, or so I thought. She was a woman who prided herself on her sacrifices for the family, a narrative she wielded like a weapon to guilt and manipulate. Then there was my younger sister, Madison. 5 years my junior, Madison was different. Quieter, more malleable, and always basking in the sunshine of our parents' favor, while I seemed perpetually cast in the shadows. Growing up, the favoritism wasn't just a feeling. It was a glaring, undeniable fact etched into the fabric of our daily lives. I remember when I was 10, I won the citywide spelling bee. I'd studied for months, my little dictionary becoming an extension of my hand. I came home clutching my trophy, beaming. My mother glanced up from her magazine, offered a cursory, "Oh, that's nice, dear," and immediately turned her attention to Madison, who had drawn a picture of a lopsided flower. That drawing was promptly displayed on the refrigerator with a flourish, while my trophy gathered dust on a shelf in my room. It was a small thing, perhaps, but those small things accumulate like 1,000 tiny cuts. Another time in high school, I earned a scholarship to a prestigious summer program for gifted students. It was a huge deal for me, a validation of my hard work. My parents' reaction, well, "Marlene, that's practical. Good for your college applications." There was no celebration, no shared excitement. Later that year, Madison made the cheerleading squad, a squad our mother had desperately wanted to be on in her own youth. The house was suddenly alive with celebration. A party was thrown. Madison was lauded as a star. I remember sitting in my room, the acceptance letter for the program, feeling like a lead weight in my hand, the familiar ache of being less than settling deep in my chest. My Grandma Palmer was my sanctuary. She was my mother's mother, but she was everything my mother wasn't. Warm, genuinely affectionate, and fiercely proud of me. She saw my potential, nurtured my curiosity, and celebrated my successes with unadulterated joy. Grandma Palmer was a retired teacher, a woman of sharp intellect and even sharper wit. She had a small, cozy house filled with books and the scent of freshly baked cookies. It was she who instilled in me a love for learning, a sense of self-worth. that my parents seemed determined to chip away at. She had a saying, "Don't let them dim your shine, Marlene. Some folks are just threatened by a little bit of light." I didn't understand it fully then, but her words became a lifeline later. My parents' relationship with Grandma Palmer was strained, to put it mildly. They'd often make comments about her old-fashioned ways or her stubbornness. Looking back, I realize it was likely because Grandma Palmer saw right through them. She wasn't easily fooled by my father's superficial charm or my mother's manipulative martyrdom. In fact, I later learned that Grandma Palmer had a history with my mother's financial creativity. My Aunt Rachel Mom's own sister had once been a victim of one of Mom's schemes, a detail conveniently omitted from our family lore until much later. This piece of information, once uncovered, would cast a chilling new light on everything. My sister Madison was harder to understand. She wasn't malicious, not inherently, but she was weak-willed, easily swayed by our parents' narrative. She soaked up their praise like a thirsty plant, and in turn, she learned to parrot their dismissive attitudes towards me. I tried to connect with her to build a sisterly bond, but there was always a chasm between us, a chasm carefully constructed and maintained by our parents. She got the latest clothes, the expensive gadgets often funded by my parents, racking up debt they'd later complain about. My needs were always too much or unnecessary. I learned early on to be self-reliant, to not ask for anything, because the disappointment was too bitter. Even my career choice, fancy consulting, as my mother mockingly called it, was a point of contention. It was too ambitious, too independent. They'd have preferred something smaller, quieter, something that kept me closer to home, perhaps more financially accessible to them. My success, instead of being a source of pride, seemed to be an affront. They'd make passive-aggressive comments about how I was too busy for family or how my job was all about money, conveniently ignoring the fact that I was often the one quietly bailing them out of their self-inflicted financial messes. I see now that my early signs of talent, my academic achievements, my analytical mind, my drive, weren't just ignored. They were actively suppressed. A bright, independent daughter didn't fit into their narrative of control and dependence. It's a painful realization, understanding that the very people who were supposed to build you up were subtly, systematically trying to tear you down. But this deep-seated pattern of injustice and emotional neglect laid the groundwork for what was to come. It explained in part how they could justify their later actions, how they could betray me and Grandma Palmer so completely. Because in their eyes, I was perhaps not fully a person with feelings to be considered, but a resource, an obligation, or simply an inconvenience, who sometimes made them look bad by comparison. And Grandma Palmer, she was just an old woman, an obstacle, and ultimately a piggy bank. The years between my childhood and the horrifying discovery that forms the heart of this story were marked by a relentless, exhausting pattern of disappointment. It wasn't just about overlooked spelling bee trophies anymore. The stakes grew higher, the dismissals more cutting the impact on my psyche, more profound. I poured myself into my studies, then my career, seeking the validation I never received at home. And with every milestone, every achievement, the pattern repeated itself. I graduated top of my class in college with a degree in economics. My parents attended the ceremony, of course. Appearances were paramount, but their praise was lukewarm, laced with caveats. "Well, Marlene, you always were a bookworm," Dad said with a dismissive chuckle. "Hopefully this fancy education will get you a good, stable job. Not one of those risky things." Mom just sighed and said, "Don't get a big head now. There's more to life than grades." Madison then, in her late teens, barely acknowledged it, too busy texting on the phone. They'd bought her a phone far more expensive than anything I'd ever owned at that age. When I landed my first major consulting gig, a prestigious role that junior analysts only dreamed of, I called home, my voice buzzing with excitement. "That's nice, dear," Mom said, her tone flat. "Just be careful with all that stress. It's not good for a young woman." Then, without missing a beat, she launched into a lengthy monologue about Madison's latest boyfriend drama, her voice suddenly animated and engaged. I remember hanging up the phone, the elation draining out of me, replaced by that familiar hollow ache. My achievements were footnotes in the grand family saga, while Madison's everyday life was the main event. This pattern extended to personal milestones, too. My 30th birthday, for instance. I'd hoped for anything, a small gesture of acknowledgement. Instead, my parents called to say they couldn't make the dinner I'd tentatively planned because Madison needed them to help her move into yet another new apartment. An apartment I later found out they were partially funding, despite their constant complaints about being broke. The internal monologue was a relentless beast by then. Why do I even try? Why do I expect anything different? They'll never change. I'm not enough. I'll never be enough. One particularly galling incident happened when I bought my first apartment. It was a modest place, but it was mine, a symbol of my independence and hard work. I invited my parents over, hoping for a sliver of pride. Dad walked in, looked around, and said, "Small, isn't it? For all that money you make." Mom fussed about the lack of a guest room for them should they ever decide to visit, which they rarely did. Later, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. "She's so solitary," Mom whispered to Dad, her voice dripping with disapproval. "All this ambition, and for what? She'll end up alone." Dad grunted in agreement. "Not like our Maddie. She's got her priorities straight. Family first, family first." Their definition of family, it seemed, was a one-way street paved with my contributions and their expectations. Madison, meanwhile, floated through life on a cloud of parental indulgence. Her jobs were often short-lived, her financial decisions questionable, but there was always a safety net woven by Mom and Dad, often using threads I unknowingly provided. When Madison announced her pregnancy with River, my niece, the family narrative shifted into overdrive. Suddenly, everything revolved around Madison and the baby. My parents were ecstatic, showering her with gifts, attention, and financial support they claimed they didn't have when I needed help with college tuition years ago. I was happy for Madison genuinely. I adored the idea of being an aunt. But the stark contrast in their treatment was a constant throbbing wound. My cousin Destiny Perry, a lawyer, and Grandma Palmer's grandniece, my mother's niece, but from a different, saner branch of the family tree, was one of the few people who saw the dynamic for what it was. Destiny was sharp, no-nonsense, and fiercely loyal. We'd grown closer over the years, bonding over our shared exasperation with certain family members. "They're users," Marlene, she'd tell me bluntly after one particularly frustrating family gathering. "You need to build some walls, or they'll bleed you dry." I knew she was right, but untangling myself from the deeply ingrained hope for their approval felt like an impossible task. The most recent major disappointment, the one that perhaps primed me for the shattering revelation to come, was related to Grandma Palmer's deteriorating health. She'd had a fall, and her needs were increasing. My parents, who lived closest to her, ostensibly took on the role of her primary caregivers. I, living a few hours away due to my job, offered to contribute financially. Significantly, I set up a monthly transfer, a substantial sum to cover home health care, specialized food, anything Grandma needed. My parents accepted the money with alacrity, assuring me Grandma was getting the best care. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about it, sweetie," Mom would chirp on the phone. "We're taking care of everything." But whenever I visited Grandma, something felt off. She seemed more withdrawn, her spark dimming. The expensive organic food I was paying for never seemed to be in the fridge. The specialized caregiver I was told they'd hired was rarely there, or it was a different person each time, often looking undertrained and overwhelmed. My parents would have a ready excuse for everything. "Oh, Grandma's just having a bad day. The agency sent a new girl, the other one was no good." I'd try to talk to Grandma privately, but she was often tired, or my parents would hover, deflecting my questions. My concerns were dismissed as me being overly anxious or not understanding how it is with old people. The last time I saw Grandma, before everything blew up, she looked frail, her eyes pleading. She squeezed my hand, a flicker of her old fire in her gaze, and whispered, "Marlene, dear, be careful." Before I could ask what she meant, Mom bustled in with a cup of weak tea, her smile tight. Now, Mother, don't you go bothering Marlene with your worries. She has enough on her plate with her fancy job." That whisper, "be careful," echoed in my mind for weeks. It was a seed of unease, a tiny crack in the carefully constructed facade my parents presented. Little did I know that crack was about to split wide open, exposing a rot so deep it would threaten to consume everything I thought I knew about my family. The pattern of disappointment was about to escalate into a full-blown nightmare. But what I didn't know was that this was just the beginning of the end of their reign of deceit. The unease Grandma Palmer's whispered warning had planted in me began to grow its tendrils, tightening around my heart. My fancy consulting job, the one my parents belittled, had trained me to spot inconsistencies, to analyze data, to trust my gut when something didn't add up. And things with Grandma's care really weren't adding up. The money I sent, nearly $100, $1,000 over 3 years, was a fortune. Yet Grandma seemed to be declining, not thriving. My parents' excuses were wearing thin, their reassurances sounding increasingly hollow. The first wave of escalation came during a tense phone call with my mother. I'd received a bill from a collection agency for an unpaid medical supply company. Supplies supposedly for Grandma. "Mom, what is this?" I asked, my voice tight with controlled anger. "I send more than enough money to cover these things." Linda's voice was instantly defensive, laced with her signature martyrdom. "Marlene, you have no idea how expensive things are. And your father, well, his health hasn't been the best either. Sometimes things get muddled." "Muddled," I pressed. "Mom, this is Grandma's health we're talking about. Are you using the money I send for her for other things?" "How dare you accuse me?" she shrieked, tears I suspected were crocodile ones welling in her voice. "After all we do, we're run ragged. Taking care of your grandmother, and this is the thanks we get. You're so ungrateful, Marlene." Always so suspicious. The call ended with her slamming the phone down, leaving me shaking with a mixture of anger and a sickening dread. This wasn't just incompetence. This felt deliberate. The second wave hit when I made an unannounced visit. I found Grandma alone, her diaper unchanged, the house stuffy and smelling of neglect. The so-called premium caregiver was nowhere to be seen. My father was out running errands, and my mother was at a doctor's appointment. Grandma looked listless, her skin papery. When I checked the fridge, it was nearly bare save for some processed cheese slices and a half-empty carton of milk. The expensive organic meals, the nutritional supplements, all absent. "Grandma," I whispered, my heart breaking. "What's going on? Are they taking care of you?" She just looked at me, her eyes filled with a profound sadness. "They try, dear," she murmured, but her voice lacked conviction. It was the look in her eyes that spoke volumes, a look of fear, of resignation. That was when my emotional breaking point began to loom. I couldn't stand by and watch her fade away. I decided then and there to move Grandma. I found a highly rated care facility, Silver Pines, and despite my parents' furious protests, "You're trying to institutionalize your grandmother. How could you be so cruel?" I made the arrangements. The relief on Grandma's face when I told her the tiny squeeze of her hand told me I was doing the right thing. The third wave was more insidious. My parents furious about losing control over Grandma, and I suspected her finances started a smear campaign. They told relatives I was cold, unfeeling, that I dumped Grandma in a home to avoid responsibility. Some believed them. The isolation was painful, but it also hardened my resolve. If they were capable of this, what else were they capable of? It was during this period of heightened suspicion that my sister Madison gave birth to her daughter River. I went to help despite the tension with my parents. Madison was overwhelmed, and for a fleeting moment I felt a flicker of sisterly connection. My parents were, of course, doting grandparents constantly at Madison's house. I bought Madison a top-of-the-line baby monitor one with video and audio, hoping it would give her some peace of mind. Little did I know that baby monitor would become the instrument of their undoing. The fourth wave, the trigger event, happened late one night. I was staying over at Madison's to help with baby River. Madison was exhausted, asleep in her room. River was sleeping soundly in her crib in the nursery. I was in the living room working on my laptop, the baby monitor on the coffee table beside me. It was 11:47 p.m. Suddenly, voices crackled through the speaker. Not River's cries, but my parents. They were in the nursery, which was next to Madison's room, thinking they were alone, speaking in hushed, conspiratorial tones. My blood ran cold. She's such a fool that Marlene, I heard my mother Linda say, her voice dripping with contempt. All that fancy education, and she still believes every word we tell her. My father Alan chuckled. That $100,000 barely touched Palmer. Paid for this house down payment, though, and my new golf clubs, and my little shopping sprees. Mom added a slyness in her tone that made me sick. Honestly, Alan, it's been so easy. She just keeps sending the money, thinks she's such a good granddaughter. Palmer never liked us much anyway, Dad said dismissively. Always favored Marlene. This is just leveling the playing field. They went on discussing how they'd faked invoices, how they'd laughed behind my back about my concern for Grandma. They even mocked Grandma Palmer herself, her frailty, her dependence. I sat there frozen, the baby monitor clutched in my hand, my breath caught in my throat. Each word was a shard of glass tearing through me. The casual cruelty, the depth of their deception, it was monstrous. It wasn't just neglect, it was calculated, systematic fraud. And they were proud of it. At that moment, I felt like my entire identity crumbled. My heart didn't just break, it shattered into 1,000 pieces. The realization hit me like a freight train loaded with years of pain, a pain I now understood was intentionally inflicted. My internal transformation began almost immediately. The shock gave way to a cold, hard rage. The years of being dismissed, overlooked, and taken for granted coalesced into a single burning point of focused justice. For Grandma Palmer, for myself, I didn't confront them then and there. My mind, sharpened by years of strategic thinking in my consulting career, kicked into gear. I needed evidence, hard evidence. So I did the only thing I could think of. I pressed the record button on my phone, capturing the rest of their sickening conversation. Little did they know I had been documenting everything. Every suspicious bill, every evasive answer, every instance of neglect for months. This recording was the smoking gun. The next morning, I feigned normalcy, my face a mask of calm, while a storm raged within me. As soon as I could, I called the one person I knew I could trust implicitly, my cousin Destiny Perry. Destiny. I said, my voice shaking despite my efforts to control it. I need your help. I think my parents have been defrauding me. And Grandma. There was a pause on the other end, then Destiny's voice, firm and resolute. Marlene, tell me everything. And I mean everything. We're going to get to the bottom of this. The stakes were higher than ever. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about exposing a monstrous betrayal and protecting Grandma Palmer from the people who should have loved her most. My allies were becoming clear, and my enemies, my own parents, had just revealed the true extent of their depravity. The fight for justice had begun, and the truth I knew would soon come to light in the most unexpected and explosive way. The days and weeks following that horrifying night were a blur of clandestine meetings, hushed phone calls, and a gnawing pit of anxiety in my stomach. Destiny, true to her word, dove headfirst into the investigation. She was a whirlwind of efficiency and righteous anger, her legal mind dissecting the situation with terrifying precision. She brought in Ian Ward, a fraud investigator with a reputation for being a bloodhound. Ian was a quiet, observant man, his eyes missing nothing. Together, they began to unravel a tapestry of deceit far more intricate and sickening than I could have ever imagined. The first major revelation came when Destiny and Ian dug into Grandma Palmer's finances. They discovered that the trust fund I'd been drawing from to send money to my parents for Grandma's care wasn't just any trust fund. Grandma Palmer, with her characteristic foresight and distrust of my parents' financial habits, had set it up years ago. And here was the kicker: she had specifically legally excluded my parents, Linda and Alan Wilkinson, from ever being beneficiaries or having any control over it. The trust was for her care to be managed by a responsible party, a role I had unknowingly stepped into only to have my parents systematically siphon off the funds. My blood boiled. They hadn't just stolen from me, they'd violated Grandma's explicit wishes, her carefully laid plans to protect herself from their avarice. The next truth bomb was even more personal. Ian Ward, with his forensic accounting skills, traced the money I'd sent. Only a minuscule fraction less than 10% had actually been spent on Grandma's care. The rest? It had vanished into my parents' lavish lifestyle. They'd paid off debts, gone on vacations they'd claimed were budget trips, and renovated their home. And then came the gut punch. They had illegally used a significant chunk of the trust money, over $200,000, to buy their current house, forging my signature on the financial documents to make it happen. I stared at the forged signature on the papers Destiny showed me. My own name twisted into a symbol of their betrayal. The audacity, the sheer gall of it left me breathless. But the violations didn't stop there. Ian uncovered something that made my skin crawl. My parents had stolen my Social Security number. They'd used it to open a high-limit credit card and, even more disgustingly, a casino player's account in my name. They'd racked up thousands in gambling debts, all under my identity, potentially ruining my credit score, my financial standing, everything I'd worked so hard to build. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They saw me not as a daughter, but as a resource to be exploited, an identity to be stolen and sullied. At that moment, I felt like my entire identity crumbled, not just from the emotional betrayal, but from the literal theft of it. The investigation also brought my sister Madison into sharper focus. Destiny and Ian found evidence that Madison had been involved, albeit perhaps reluctantly. Several smaller checks drawn from an account linked to Grandma's funds bore signatures that looked suspiciously like Madison's attempt to forge mine. It was a sickening thought. My own sister, a participant in this charade. Was she a willing accomplice or another victim of their manipulation? My internal monologue was a chaotic storm. One moment I was consumed by a white-hot rage, envisioning a dramatic confrontation, their downfall. The next, I was drowning in a sea of grief, mourning the family I thought I had, the parents I desperately wished were different. But through it all, a steely resolve began to form. The shock was morphing into empowerment. I wouldn't let them get away with this. I couldn't. Destiny and Ian advised caution. We needed more concrete evidence, especially regarding Madison's involvement and the full scope of their deception. They're cunning, Marlene, Ian warned. They'll deny everything, try to turn it back on you. We need an airtight case. So the planning and preparation phase began. We started meticulously gathering every piece of paper, every email, every recorded conversation. I remembered the upcoming event, my father's 60th birthday party. My parents were planning a big celebration at their house, the house bought with stolen money. It was the perfect, if painful, opportunity. They'd be relaxed, boastful, perhaps, and many family members would be there, potential witnesses to their character, if not directly to their crimes. I also decided I had to confront Madison, but carefully. I needed to know where she stood. I met her for coffee, River gurgling happily in her stroller beside us. I laid out some of the evidence gently at first, watching her face. She crumbled. Tears streamed down her face as she confessed. She had forged my signature multiple times on checks on documents. I didn't want to, Marlene. I swear she sobbed, her voice barely a whisper. Mom pressured me. She said it was just to help Grandma out with paperwork, that you knew about it. She said if I didn't, they'd lose the house, that it would all fall on me and River. Her confession was a strange mix of relief and deeper pain. Relief that she wasn't a cold-hearted perpetrator, but pain that she had been so weak, so easily manipulated into betraying me and Grandma. But her cooperation was crucial. She agreed to provide a formal statement to tell Destiny and Ian everything she knew. And she revealed more instances of deceit, more hidden accounts, more lies. The total fraud we now estimated was well over $700,000. It was staggering. Madison also confirmed what I had long suspected. Our parents had a history of this. They had defrauded Aunt Rachel, Mom's own sister, years ago, ruining her financially and emotionally. The pattern was undeniable, their depravity seemingly boundless. With Madison's testimony, our case became ironclad. The anticipation for the confrontation, for the moment the truth would finally explode into the open, was almost unbearable. My heart ached for the finality of it, the destruction of what little remained of my family. But my resolve was firm. Justice for Grandma Palmer. Justice for Aunt Rachel. Justice for myself. They had sown the wind. Now they would reap the whirlwind. Life has its own way of getting even, and karma with our help was already working, preparing a reckoning they would never forget. The day of my father's 60th birthday party arrived cloaked in a deceptive late spring sunshine. Their house, the house built on lies and stolen funds, was festooned with balloons and streamers, a grotesque parody of celebration. Relatives and friends, many of whom had heard my parents' carefully crafted narrative of me being the cold, ungrateful daughter, mingled in the backyard sipping drinks, oblivious to the storm about to break. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was it, the culmination of months of investigation, years of pain, and a lifetime of carefully concealed truths. Destiny and Ian were discreetly positioned nearby, ready to step in. Madison was with me, pale but resolute, clutching my hand. Grandma Palmer thankfully was safe and comfortable at Silver Pines, unaware of the drama about to unfold in her name. The moment came during my father's birthday speech. He stood on the patio, beaming a glass of champagne in his hand, my mother Linda beside him, looking smug and regal. He was waxing lyrical about family, about loyalty, about the wonderful life they'd built. The hypocrisy was suffocating. "And I want to thank my wonderful wife, Linda," he slurred slightly, already tipsy for standing by me through thick and thin. "And my daughters, well, Madison, you've given us our beautiful river. And Marlene," he paused, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Well, Marlene is Marlene." A few people chuckled awkwardly. That was my cue. I stepped forward, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the polite applause. "Actually, Dad, I have something I'd like to say about family, about loyalty, and about the wonderful life you've built." A hush fell over the crowd. My father looked momentarily confused, then annoyed. "Marlene, not now. This is a party." "Oh, I think it's the perfect time," I said, my gaze sweeping over the assembled guests. "Because you all deserve to know the truth about Alan and Linda Wilkinson." And then I laid it all bare. I started with the money for Grandma Palmer's care, nearly $100,000 I'd sent money they'd pocketed while neglecting her. I spoke of the trust fund Grandma had specifically set up to protect herself from them. I revealed how they'd forged my signature to buy the very house they were standing in. The casino account in my name, the stolen Social Security number. Each revelation landed like a physical blow. Gasps rippled through the crowd, faces turned from polite smiles to shock and disbelief. My mother tried to interrupt, her voice shrill. "She's lying. She's always been jealous, always trying to cause trouble." But I wasn't the uncertain, easily dismissed Marlene anymore. "Lying, Mom," I countered, my voice hardening. "Then perhaps you can explain these." I held up copies of the forged documents, the bank statements tracing the stolen funds, the printout of the casino account. Or maybe you can explain the recording of your conversation on River's baby monitor, where you bragged about defrauding me and neglecting Grandma, the color drained from their faces. My father sputtered, speechless. My mother's eyes darted around, looking for an escape, but there was none. The power dynamic had completely, irrevocably reversed. Then Madison stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "It's true. All of it. They made me forge Marlene's signature. They threatened me. I'm so sorry, Marlene." She looked at me, tears streaming down her face, and for the first time I saw not a rival, but a sister broken and manipulated. Aunt Rachel, my mother's sister, who had been listening with a thunderous expression, suddenly spoke up, her voice ringing with decades of suppressed pain. "They did it to me, too. Years ago, they ruined me financially. Linda, you and Alan, you're thieves, you're monsters." The shock reactions were palpable. Jaws dropped. Whispers turned into horrified murmurs. Some relatives looked at my parents with dawning disgust. Others, who had perhaps benefited from their ill-gotten gains, looked distinctly uncomfortable. My father, his face purple with rage and humiliation, finally found his voice. "Get out, all of you. Get out of my house." "Actually, Dad," I said calmly, "I don't think it is your house, legally speaking." That's when Destiny and Ian Ward stepped forward, accompanied by 2 uniformed police officers. Alan Wilkinson, Linda Wilkinson. Destiny announced, her voice resonating with authority. You are under arrest for multiple counts of fraud, financial, elder abuse, and identity theft. My mother let out a strangled shriek and lunged at me, her face contorted with fury. You ungrateful bitch! You've destroyed this family! One of the officers intercepted her easily. My father just sagged, defeated, all the bluster gone, looking suddenly old and pathetic. The sight of them being handcuffed, their faces a mixture of shock, rage, and dawning terror, was not joyful. It was deeply, profoundly sad. But it was also just. This wasn't a moment of petty revenge. It was a moment of profound cleansing justice. Karma didn't just come for them, it brought an entire army of their misdeeds to their doorstep. As they were led away, the party guests stood in stunned silence. Some looked at me with newfound respect, others with pity, a few with lingering suspicion perhaps. But no one could deny the weight of the evidence, the rawness of the truth. My moment of triumph wasn't loud or boastful. It was a quiet reclaiming of my power, my voice, my truth. The public humiliation of my parents was a consequence of their own actions, a mirror reflecting their ugliness back at them. Justice wasn't just served, it was a 5-course meal of their own making, and the main course was truth. In the ensuing quiet, Madison came to me, her body shaking. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right, Marlene. I'll testify. I'll help you. I looked at my younger sister, truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time, without the filter of our parents' manipulation. And I saw a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, something good could rise from these ashes. But for now, the reign of Alan and Linda Wilkinson was over. The truth had finally devastatingly set us free. The hours and days following my parents' arrests were a maelstrom of legal proceedings, emotional fallout, and an overwhelming sense of both relief and desolation. The Wilkinson family scandal, as it quickly became known amongst our extended family and local community, sent shockwaves. The perfect facade my parents had meticulously maintained for decades had shattered into a million pieces, exposing the rotten core beneath. The immediate consequences were swift. Bail was set extraordinarily high, given the flight risk and the severity of the charges, particularly the elder abuse component. They couldn't afford it. Not with their assets frozen, their web of deceit, now a matter of public record. They spent their first nights in a county jail cell, a stark contrast to the comfortable home they'd stolen. Family members reacted in a spectrum of ways. Aunt Rachel was my staunchest supporter. She called me, her voice thick with emotion. Marlene, you did what I never had the courage to do. Thank you. Thank you for finally exposing them. Her validation was a balm to my raw nerves. Other relatives, those who had been swayed by my parents' lies about me, sent awkward, apologetic messages. Some, however, remained distant, either too embarrassed or too complicit in their silence over the years. The lines were drawn, and the family landscape was irrevocably altered. My parents predictably attempted damage control from behind bars. During their initial interrogations, they tried to blame everyone but themselves. My mother, Linda, spun a tale of being a victim herself, manipulated by my father. My father, Alan, tried to paint me as a vindictive daughter, exaggerating their mistakes out of spite. They even tried to discredit Madison, calling her a troubled young woman easily influenced. But their lies were transparent, now their credibility shot. Ian Ward and the prosecutors had built an irrefutable case bolstered by Madison's detailed statement. Madison, to her credit, held firm. She met with the prosecutors, provided a full, tearful confession of her role, and agreed to testify against our parents. It was an incredibly difficult decision for her, fraught with guilt and fear. But she knew it was the only way to begin to atone for her part and protect her own future and River's. She was terrified of the consequences, but destiny assured her that her cooperation would be viewed favorably. This was her first true step towards independence from our parents' toxic influence. I, too, had to be firm. My parents, through their lawyer, attempted to reach out to manipulate me with pleas for forgiveness, for help. I refused all contact. My boundary was clear. The legal process would run its course. There was nothing left to say to them directly. My focus was on Grandma Palmer, on ensuring her continued well-being, and on navigating my own emotional labyrinth. Support came from unexpected allies. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years reached out offering words of encouragement. Colleagues at my fancy consulting firm, once kept at arm's length from my family drama, were incredibly understanding, offering me time off and practical support. Even some of the guests from that disastrous birthday party contacted me expressing their shock and solidarity. It was a poignant reminder that while some family bonds can be toxic, chosen family and true friends can be a lifeline. The story, of course, didn't stay contained. In this age of social media, whispers turned into posts, shares, and comments. While I didn't actively publicize the details at that stage, the general outline of a daughter exposing her parents' massive fraud and elder abuse became a local sensation. There was an outpouring of support for me and Grandma Palmer and a collective condemnation of my parents' actions. It was a strange experience seeing my private pain become a public spectacle, but it also highlighted how prevalent these issues are. How many people resonated with themes of family betrayal and the fight for justice. In the short term, the family dynamics were entirely reconfigured. Grandma Palmer, now safe at Silver Pines, began to slowly blossom. Freed from the oppressive atmosphere in my parents' home, she started engaging in activities, making friends, her old spark returning. I visited her regularly, sharing quiet moments, unspoken understanding passing between us. Madison and I began a tentative journey towards rebuilding our sisterly relationship. It was awkward, painful at times, but there was a new honesty between us, a shared trauma that paradoxically started to bridge the chasm our parents had created. Emotionally, I was a wreck, yet strangely empowered. The victory was not without its scars. The grief for the family I'd lost, or perhaps never truly had, was immense. There were nights I cried myself to sleep mourning the mother and father they should have been, but there was also a profound sense of liberation. The heavy cloak of their disapproval, their manipulations, their constant undermining of my worth, it was gone. I had faced the monsters, and I had won. Justice was being served not just legally, but emotionally. I was finally free to define myself, my life, on my own terms. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like my path, and I was resolute in walking it with my head held high. 3 years. 3 years can feel like a lifetime or the blink of an eye. For me, it was a period of profound transformation, of rebuilding not just my life, but my very sense of self. The storm had passed, and in its wake, a new landscape had emerged, one of peace, purpose, and unexpected joy. My parents' legal battles ended as many such cases do, with plea bargains and prison sentences. My father Alan faced with the mountain of irrefutable evidence, and Madison's damning testimony eventually took a plea deal. He was sentenced to 7 years in state prison for fraud and financial exploitation. As part of his deal, he agreed to testify against my mother. Linda, ever defiant, ever convinced of her own blamelessness, refused any deal. She went to trial. The jury found her guilty on all counts, including the more severe charges of elder abuse and identity theft. Her sentence was 15 years. 15 years. Karma didn't just come for them, it brought an entire army of consequences. Their letters from prison filled with blame, self-pity, and desperate attempts at manipulation started arriving a few months into their sentences. I read the first one, then decided I wouldn't engage. Their apologies, if they ever came, needed to be for themselves, not for me. My closure wouldn't be found in their words, but in my own healing. Grandma Palmer thrived. At Silver Pines, she received the loving professional care she'd always deserved. Her health improved remarkably. Her wit returned sharper than ever. She became the unofficial queen of the Scrabble Club and started painting again, a passion she'd long abandoned. Seeing her happy, safe, and cherished was the greatest reward. She passed away peacefully 2 years after my parents' conviction, at the ripe old age of 92, surrounded by love, not neglect. Her legacy, her strength, and her unwavering belief in me became the bedrock of my future. Madison's journey was perhaps the most complex. Testifying against her parents was agonizing, but it was also liberating. She faced probation for her involvement, but avoided jail time due to her cooperation and the clear evidence of coercion. She struggled with guilt, with the stigma, with rebuilding her life as a single mother to River. But she was determined. She went into therapy, found a stable job, and dedicated herself to being the best mother she could be. Our relationship, once so fractured, slowly mended. We built a new bond, one based on honesty, mutual respect, and a shared commitment to breaking the cycle of toxicity. She even started volunteering with organizations supporting families in crisis. And me, I found my calling. The anger, the pain, the outrage I'd felt. I channeled it all into something positive, something meaningful. With Destiny's legal expertise and a portion of the restitution recovered from my parents' assets and a good chunk of my own savings, I established the Palmer Perry Foundation for Elder Protection. Named in honor of Grandma Palmer, and with Destiny by my side as a board member, our mission is to advocate for victims of elder abuse, provide legal aid, and raise awareness about this insidious crime. My fancy consulting skills found a new purpose building strategies, managing resources, and fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. The foundation grew slowly but surely, gaining recognition and making a tangible difference. In the end, the truth didn't just set me free, it rebuilt me stronger with a purpose I'd never imagined. My life transformed in other ways, too. I learned to set healthy boundaries, to trust my intuition, and to value my own worth. I reconnected with genuine, supportive people and built new, meaningful relationships. The constant ache of seeking approval from people incapable of giving it vanished, replaced by a quiet confidence and a deep sense of peace. I even started dating again this time with a clearer understanding of what a healthy partnership looks like. Reflecting on the journey, the lessons were stark and profound. Betrayal can come from the most unexpected places, even from those who are supposed to love you unconditionally. But it doesn't have to define you. Strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting up, dusting yourself off, and fighting for what's right even when your hands are shaking. And sometimes the greatest act of love for yourself and for those you truly care about is to cut ties with the toxic elements in your life, no matter how painful. What goes around doesn't just come around. It multiplies both the bad and eventually the good you put out into the world. The emptiness left by my parents was filled not with bitterness, but with purpose, love, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had turned their darkness into a beacon of light for others. So that's my story, or at least a significant chapter of it. It's a story about the darkest betrayals and the brightest resilience. The deep moral here isn't just about the evil some people are capable of even within families. It's about the incredible strength we all possess to fight back, to heal, and to create something beautiful from the wreckage. It's about recognizing that your worth is inherent, not dependent on the validation of others, especially those who seek to diminish you. Have you ever felt like the forgotten child, the one whose achievements were always downplayed? Have you ever had to confront a painful truth about people you loved? What did you do? How did you find your strength? I truly want to know. Comment your own family drama story or your moments of triumph below. Let's build a community of support and understanding right here. If this story resonated with you, if you believe that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, especially our elders, please like this video, subscribe for more content, and share this story. You never know who might need to hear it, who might be living in a similar nightmare and need a sign that they're not alone and that escape is possible. My journey taught me that true family isn't always about blood. It's about love, respect, and unwavering support. It taught me that justice, even when it feels impossible, is worth fighting for. And most importantly, it taught me that self-worth isn't a gift given by others. It's a fortress you build within yourself, stone by stone, truth by truth. I'm Marlene, and this is just one part of my ongoing mission. The Palmer Perry Foundation is now taking on its first official pro bono case, helping another family navigate the treacherous waters of elder exploitation. And guess who just officially joined our volunteer team, bringing her own hard-won wisdom and a fierce desire to help Madison? Together, we're forging a new legacy, one built on truth, compassion, and an unbreakable bond. Hit that subscribe button if you're ready to hear more stories of triumph, healing, and the relentless pursuit of justice. There's so much more to share. Thank you for listening.